China has what's called an assassin's mace, right? It controls where you get stuff. And it's sort of like, oh, you don't want to work together with me? Fine. I'm not selling you copper wire anymore. And then next, I'm not selling electric motors anymore. I'll sell you electric vehicles, right? They have the ability to squeeze and apply a huge amount of pressure. But it was more of a warning shot that, guys, we control this and we can actually, you don't want to buy my stuff? I can make you very, very painful that you won't be able to build your own.
A lot of volatility in base metals. What is the commodities complex signaling in terms of economic growth? Are base metals a buy? We'll be looking at copper in particular today. Ian Harris joins us today. He is the CEO of Copper Giant, TSXV, CGNT. We'll be talking about upcoming announcements or projects from the company, as well as his outlook on the commodity space. Welcome back to the show, Ian. Good to see you as always.
Thanks, David. It's always a pleasure to be in your hot seat.
We spoke a couple of months ago, and at the time, copper had not seen this much volatility. Let me just show my screen so you can see what I'm looking at here. This is the copper price chart. So we've got a huge downturn in early April, followed by a sharp recovery. A lot of it looks like it's mirroring the SPX. If I can just overlay this with the stock market, ever since the beginning of April, late March, it looks like copper has just been following the stock markets, kind of reacting to the tariffs announcements together. What do you make of this chart? What do you make of this relationship that started to get more close, shall we say, in the last month?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about copper being forces of long-term versus short-term pulls on it, right? And when it's more short-term, it acts more like Dr. Copper. That's why it's normally an indicator of what the world thinks is the health of the world economy. And so you can definitely tell. I've never seen this level of volatility in copper price. To see 4% moves in a single day in copper is just extremely rare. And it just says it is definitely playing more to how the world anticipates is the impact of these tariff wars, right? But in the background, also the reason why it pops back up and it's still over $4 is because there's the long term narrative hasn't changed. It's probably even got stronger, even with a slower world economy. The need and requirement and the demand from newer sectors is continuing to make that pull. But without a doubt, you can see the chart is playing. You pulled up how the stock markets are playing. It's traded very close, where it's risk off, risk on, go to cash kind of knee-jerk reactions. And there was a little bit of an overlay, and you can see kind of where there's a slow drop right before, while the markets were actually going up, that coincides with a holiday in China. But that, as we can see, was short-lived.
Ian, do you think that copper is signaling an economic rebound right now, given the way it's been behaving?
Well, I think that you can play it as much as the stock market. Every day somebody wakes up and there's a different concept of how this is all going to be playing out. I just don't know how long. Well, I do know that markets hate uncertainty, and uncertainty is the worst. But as uncertainty lowers, right, we'll see what happens in terms of where money is flowing. Right. And I think that's where the biggest difference is going to be. Where is money going to redeploy? Right. If this shakeup has maybe shaken things out of tech, for example, right, maybe it flows to sectors that are performing extremely well at these extremely high commodity prices, because copper is high, silver is high, gold is high. Both copper and gold hit records, right? But we haven't seen that translate to equities, but it's definitely hit their bottom lines. And so when people start looking, whoa, where should we redeploy? We'll see where the money moves. I heard an expression a lot. I love it. Follow the money, right? Because the long-term fundamentals of copper haven't changed. And we've talked about it before. There's always been the narrative about the energy transition, the more dependence on electricity for our source of energy, right? Or just developing nations having that underlying normal requirement. That's why it's called Dr. Copper. But the big one that I'm following, it's not big now, but it's one of those that every time you look, the requirements are doubling. Is for data centers and AI, because I feel that is a race that cannot be lost, right? Everybody wants to do it faster, quicker. right? And they've got checkbooks behind it because it's a race that cannot be lost. We could say in many ways, the United States has lost the race on electric vehicles. While you can't buy a BYD in United States, I can tell you they are everywhere where I go in South America. They are, and it's because they could control those production chains. And so I think that part of the story where you have techs mixing with the energy sector and the supply chain sector is going to be we're going to look back at this as a point in history. We go, this is the day a lot of things changed.
Is it fair to make the assessment that the run up from the beginning of January, basically Trump's inauguration, up until its peak in late March, was the market buying copper on demand because they were anticipating tariffs to push up the price? And so they were stockpiling raw materials. And then when the tariff announcements were made on Liberation Day, people dumped copper immediately afterward. And now the market is stabilizing. Does that narrative make sense to you, Ian?
I think that without a doubt, we saw a run up of copper price because there was stockpiling out of a fear of tariffs. We saw that in gold, we saw that in silver, we saw that in copper, right? Um, but I don't think there's that much thought going into it on a day to day basis. It's was oh no, tariffs are coming. We better stockpile. Oh no, the world is going to slow down drop. Oh, there's it's very knee jerky reaction. I've never seen such a quick correction in prices, and it just seems people are looking for a north.
Okay. Looking ahead now, what are the major drivers for not just copper, but the rest of base metals going into the rest of the year? Certainly, we've still got the ongoing trade war with China that hasn't been resolved yet. China, by the way, is the world's largest refiner of copper. I think most of the world's smelting and refining of copper is done in China. So I just wonder how this ongoing tariff and trade war situation is going to impact copper and base metals for the rest of 2025.
So let's separate this into two pieces. The first is copper price, and then it's copper equities, right? The mining companies, the
Sure.
exploration companies, right? Because I think it's finally playing out interestingly, right? Because you just mentioned a statistic that I've known for a very long time, right? Because I spent a lot of time in copper, but it's becoming a part of the news. Like, oh my goodness, China controls 50% of all smelting capacity. And within their realm of influence are even more of where a lot of the big smelting capacity has been added, whether Africa or other locations. And it's coming like it's been an eye opener, right? But it's obviously something we've known for a while. But when you have a working globalized economy, it's not that big of a deal. I don't care where I get my electric motor from at the end of the day, how it's built, as long as I get it, right? But trade wars start to develop isolationism and nationalism within countries. And of course, economy like the United States. And the whole point of tariffs is bringing manufacturing home. It's learning that China has what's called an assassin's mace, right? It controls where you get stuff. And it's sort of like, oh, you don't want to work together with me? Fine. I'm not selling you copper wire anymore. And then next, I'm not selling electric motors anymore. I'll sell you the electric vehicles, right? They have the ability to squeeze and apply a huge amount of pressure. And I think they shot warnings across the bow with antimony and other metals, and the rare earths is what we hear so much about. But it was more of a warning shot that, guys, we control this, and we can actually. You don't want to buy my stuff? I can make you very, very painful that you won't be able to build your own. And so in that case, right? So I feel that copper price will probably be over the rest of 2028 if it behaves normally, right? If tariffs end up having an impact on world economies, right? It matters how big that impact is, right? It will correspond to the price of copper, right? But it's not like we have an excessive amount of supply right now where we'd have a glut, right? I think it will have it, we're talking 10, 20% moves difference throughout the entire year based on what the world thinks the economy is going. But the need to create new supply chains is going to, I think, really drive mining equities across all metals, right? Because China doesn't just control copper, right? You can go through the list. And I
Yeah.
think people know what happened in or don't know, right? The amount they control of solar panels, for example. They saw this. And 10 years ago, they control 95%. Nobody like, yeah, who cares? Right. But today, when 80% of all new power coming into the United States is solar, right? Now it's a big deal. And then the next one is electric vehicles, and they're beating, the pants out of everybody else. And so now I think, well, we cannot keep losing, right?
All right. So the mining sector, let's talk about mining equities now, specifically copper and base metal mining companies. How are they reacting to changes in fiscal policy as well as trade policy? So basically, you as CEO, are you doing anything differently with your long-term strategy now that we have this trade war uncertainty that's on everybody's minds?
So yes, long-term strategy without a doubt, right? You have to take into effect, or at least from our perspective, we look at big projects. We want bigger scale projects that are attractive to the largest the largest mining companies or nations, right? And become a part of their plan, right? So we have to be able to navigate that, right? Colombia, for example, where we work, is a major non-NATO ally of the United States. That's the same as Australia or Japan and level of alliance, and that helps a lot. But that means we need to know what side on where we could be going. We could be a part of that overall solution, and how do we guide it to make sure it's ready for that time. Mining is about timing, right? There's only been 5 large scale copper mines built in the last 10 years. 5, right? So it's all about getting through a window when there is a driver to get projects built, right? So, yes, in the short term, it's all about equities and equity pricing. And about financing and keeping your project moving forward. But it is definitely a part of my long-term strategy because I was lucky enough to be a part of one of those 5 and have a director who was part of another one of those 5. So we know how this works and we know how things can get through windows.
Do you think sentiment in the mining sector is being reflected in the share prices of not just your company, but other mining companies right now? In other words, do you think this renewed optimism that people have for the stock market ever since the beginning of April, is that going to be reflected in mining, do you think?
So this is a very difficult question because I started by saying follow the money, right?
Yeah.
And I think we do have a moment where at least people are thinking, right? Ideas have been challenged, right? The real winner of Trump in the beginning was Bitcoin, right? And it was also the one that got most devastated when things, went the wrong direction, right? Which kind of defeats their narrative, right? And as these narratives get destroyed, right, there's people who are going to be going, where should the money flow? Right. So I think the big one is that I believe, right, that the mining as a sector is probably the highest performing in terms of cash flow versus valuation of any sector on any of the big boards, right? So I don't think it's reflected yet because I also think today everybody is thinking very short term, right? The only thing that people worry about, what are the impacts of tariffs and where are tariffs going? But as this plays out and we have more certainty, I think that mining in general will be a huge winner because money will start deploying that direction. I am a strong believer. I also have my indicators. I call them early indicators. How often do I get called by a headhunter? How often do I get called about somebody with a project? How often do I get called where people are trying to put a new deal together? And I feel like I wake up every morning and go, it sure does feel like a bull, except for it's not reflected in the price. There's the early movers are moving, right? And I also see the movements in the majors, right? In the corporates, right? I see a lot more. They're looking at projects a whole lot more. They're paying a whole lot more attention, seeing them moving into new jurisdictions. We saw a blight of option agreement, and now we see them. They're making option agreements with different exploration projects, right? So the whole system is gearing up without a doubt. So there is an anticipation, I think, of a much better equities market.
Gold miners are doing very well this year. The GDX, for example, is up more than 30%. The GDXJ is up more than 30%. Gold is up, as you know. I wonder if that's a gold specific narrative or, like you said, people are just starting to start paying attention more to mining equities in general.
Greed drives attention.
Hmm.
So when you have 30% gains in any sector, then it will start applying to the entire sector. Now, maybe if it's uranium or lithium or cobalt, right? It's just not a big enough sector. But when you talk about sectors like gold, right? I mean, the biggest on the equities, gold and copper, in terms of the from small to big, right? There's the iron's bigger, right? But it's controlled by the big boys, right? And it's just going to get attention back. Hey, did you what you just that stat you just mentioned? A lot of people are hearing that stat and they're going, maybe I should start looking at mining in general. And the narrative that works for gold also applies to copper. Its price is way higher than it's been in a very long time, right? The majors are performing well. Their margins are higher than they have ever been, right? So it's playing out, and it trickles down. What I like hearing is that in the juniors, it also is up, right? So the money is flowing downwards, right? So there is that anticipation, and I don't think we've seen the moves yet in copper, but I don't think it's going to be very far behind, right?
What is the mining industry going to do now to do two things, specifically copper mining? A, attract investor interest, and B, meet this long-term supply gap that you and I have talked about several times in the past. And by the way, we can check out Ian's past interviews with me. They were great. Link down below for the last one. But yeah, let's just focus on investor interest for now, and then longer term, the supply gap issue.
So let's like look at the majors, right? And I want to kind of pop a myth, right? I've said it a lot, right? Industry doesn't care about a supply gap. It doesn't,
Yeah.
right? It why, right? If there's not enough supply, right, then their price goes up, right? Their commodity goes up, right? So the large guys are interested in return for their investors, and we've saw it play out, right? It seems to be coming to an end, right, where it was we will just buy each other, ride the price, ride the price change, which will hit our bottom line, right? And so we can build the least risky route to value creation is by merger and acquisition of producing assets, right? But there will become a time when, okay, guys, what are you going to do now? Right. And that's when you start seeing adding on additional resources and reserves. And I think that's where things start to really play out. Very interesting in terms of attracting. They've played. Let's do the dividends, and I think they're going to do the right things. But the biggest ones is to see returns come back, seeing 30% moves in the markets start bringing greed back, bringing attention back, right? In the past it was dividends, but I think now it will be on growth. People will start focusing, when they want more. 30% was great. I want more than that now, right? So what comes next? And I think that's the way it's all going to play out. And I think, from my perspective and I want to be what they're looking for, right? I want to be the one of the least risk options to create growth.
Is your overall strategy different now than before, now that you've had this name change? So let me just address the news that came out this week. So the name of the company now is Copper Giant. Like I mentioned at the beginning, CGNT on the TSX Venture. So Copper Giant Resources Corp. Shares will begin trading under the new ticker and name symbol as of May 1st. So that was earlier this week. Tell us about this shift in strategy. You still have your main project in Macoa. So I'm just wondering if this is just a branding issue or you're completely changing your strategy here.
There is a change in strategy that I like to go over and why the name change actually happened and why it came all about. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the original strategy has been polished in terms of what we wanted to do. And it all changed when Frank Giustra became a major shareholder and the company officially moved into the Fiore Group, right? And there was an idea then,
Sorry, just
right,
just
that we
sorry.
could.
Don't mean to interrupt. When did that happen? When did Frank move into this company?
It was last year,
Okay.
January, February, March time period that it really started happening, and of course there was a little bit of transition, and there was a belief, including mine, right? The project puts out incredible drilling results. It will get attention, and it will start increasing in value. And Frank has always had a buy and build type strategy for the company, right? Which means get it to the size where somebody wants to we can buy it, advance it, and somebody else will want to build it, right? But that's for the right, that's scale is very important when it comes to the who you're trying to sell it to, right? And we can go deeper into that, right? But we started the project and hit what we're going through right now, this incredible volatility, which makes it difficult to graduate. And I can explain what that means, but there's basically evaluation for projects that kind of are good projects but aren't moving forward versus the ones that are advancing. And the difference is zero point 0.1, zero point 0.2 cents in the ground versus one or two. And we thought we would be able to make that graduation, but it's been difficult, right? And this, the overall, headwinds faced by the uncertainty overall in market. But graduations do happen, right? They're rare, but they do happen. We've seen it. Corex is a great example. Um, but Frank was like, you know what? It doesn't matter, right? And we wanted to take a deeper dive into the project. He said, I want to put my name on it, right? That's what he likes doing. He wants to show that it's his company, right? And so the name change was part about that. But the same thing that was happening at the same time is we just finished the first kind of newer holes into the project, 1,000-meter intersections, and it attracted a lot of attention. Geologists within the Fiore group, but also brought in some external experts, and they went through it and said, okay, these are the 7 things that we look for a really big project, right? We're kind of drilling, looking at the deposit area, getting these incredible hits, but you know, where are you? Where are you? How long did was the fertile time? The type of chemistry, the size of the halo, the density of the stockwork. What is the vertical continuity, which is what the drill holes really showed was the vertical continuity. And is there a potential for multiple centers? And the big one was also the big eye opener was Macoa has been fertile. It was fertile for 10 million years, right? Which is an extremely long fertile time, right? Sometimes some deposits are 1.5 or 2 or 3 or 5 years, right? But to have 10 million years is an extremely long time. How long this overall system was cooking. And that was really a big eye opener moment for everybody working on it, right? So it's saying this thing is way bigger than we thought, right? Not only in the deposit area, but the opportunity to find additional porphyry centers. And we said, that's what we need to focus on. Don't focus on this deposit, improving this deposit, although it's 600 million tons. So it's not like it's a small project, right? It's already a big project, already contains over 4 billion pounds of copper, right? So it's no small project, but it can be way bigger, right? And that it could be a district scale opportunity. We have, over 80,000 hectares locked up on the trend. And so it was also reflective on that new understanding. It's why we made Frank basically doubled down, increased his ownership, and we decided to mobilize a second drill despite not reflecting an improvement in share price in the short term, because there's a belief that it's only a matter of time. And so that's really what the name change is all about. It's this new concept that this is truly a copper giant. It's got the potential, and Frank's behind it.
Tell us about the geology of the Macoa deposit and what makes this particular jurisdiction unique. Is it the grade? Is it the fact that there's a lot of mining around the region, and it's a well-established area for copper extraction? Is it just the labor is cheaper? Like all of the above, none of the above. What makes this jurisdiction unique?
Let me split it into the two sections there, right? Let's talk geology and let's talk what bigger companies are looking for. And the first thing, if you've ever seen the chart, there's a BHP report about the copper outlook and they go into deep depth. But the big one tells you two stories. One is there's been fewer discoveries and those discoveries are deep. Deep is a problem, right? It means much more capital, right? And it means much higher cost, right? Because you got to get there, right? And then it's obviously a more difficult mining method, right? So there's fewer near surface projects. And the second one was one of the reasons we've had this glut is because there was a realization that it's cheaper to add brownfields capacity than to add greenfields projects, right? Meaning it's easier to make a big project bigger than it is to make a big project, right? But those days are gone, right? That we've seen where now the lines have crossed where it's now you can't this marginal production is deeper, bigger, lower grade. All these things are like we need new supply. Okay, so they're looking for good grade, near surface, and the rare as hen's teeth. They haven't been discovered, right? So that's the big thing about Macoa. It has the potential to be very big. It's already big, and it's near surface. The other is infrastructure, right? And that's a huge thing that Macoa has going for it. It has two 220 kVA power lines, the interconnection between Colombia and Ecuador. They go right by the project. It's near a town, but there's nobody in the deposit area, wouldn't have any resettlements, right? And there's a national road system. It goes right to a port, right? It has all these things because capital costs are driven by how deep it is, right? But independent of where they are on the planet, if you have to build power lines, you have to build all this infrastructure. That's really what balloons. When you're up in the Andes Mountains near to nothing, right? It costs a fortune getting your water there, getting your power there, getting all these things there, right? That's an advantage. From a geological side, right? What are we seeing? And I said it first, it's the Jurassic Belt. That's the Andes Belt, which at one time I think was responsible for 80% of all discoveries. But even today, I think it's five of the top 10 largest mines in the world are on this Andes Belt, and we are in the Jurassic portion of it. So you have the overall geometry of what's called a compressional arc, right? Which creates a subduction zone. That's why you see them all in a line that goes from Chile, and then Chile was the biggest producer, and then it's more production in Peru, et cetera, et cetera. Then Mirador and Ecuador, things are moving north as you continue to explore north on this belt. Then it's the chemistry. I won't go too much into that, but it has the right chemistry. It's got a very large alteration halo. It's over 5 kilometers. It's got density of veining over 3%. It's got over a kilometer drill holes that are continuous mineralization, and it's got the indications through geophysics and geochemistry of having multiple porphyry centers. And then the last big one was how long was it fertile, right? What was the age of the first mineralizing event, and what was the age of the last one? And that 10 million years thing was just sitting there cooking. And I think the best indicator of that is how high grade the moly is, because each time you have a little pulse, the moly grade just gets higher and higher because it doesn't remobilize. So you put all those things together, right? We have one of those perfect, it'll be one of the top 5 projects in the world. And if we can get the scale and get it even bigger, right, it will be even more attractive. So it will be checking all the boxes geologically. And that's why the new focus is on showing the size and scale potential, right? Bringing in a second drill so we can test and take larger step outs within the deposit area and start testing some of these new. It's focus on the size and scale potential. And that was really the bigger change within the strategy.
Ian, do you have or does Copper Giant have a target of the indicated resource size after which you would be satisfied with meeting that target and perhaps move on to the next step, whatever that next phase may be?
Yeah, it's kind of incremental. I think a major box, we're already at 600 million tons. And I kind of went through this. An ideal starter size is when you can mine 200 million tons, right? Because that's 30,000. But everybody wants to get, it can grow to about 150,000 tons per day. And that means over a billion mineable. And don't forget, there's a difference between as you go from resource to reserve, less of the overall resource sometimes get. So you have to be bigger to leave a little fat that can be cut, right? It's kind of the easy way of understanding it. So that means that we want to be well over the billion ton size, right? My ideal size would be getting towards that 2 billion. Then we know that Macoa will be one of the best projects on the planet, right? There's just so few near surface, larger scale porphyries in the world. And then we're also controlling a district. And I'll go back into that for half a second. So internally, the first, for me, big milestone is showing how we can get over a billion tons, focusing on getting over a billion tons, and then going even bigger, right? Because that would just be the deposit area when we'll also need to look at additional porphyry centers. The other thing I'd like to explain, right, is that we control over 75 kilometers along that Jurassic belt. Where I was in Ecuador, the same Jurassic belt, which is in Ecuador, right, was Fruta del Norte, Mirador, Mirador Norte, Pananza, San Carlos, and Warintza, right, which is the other, I think, great near surface deposit that compares so well to Macoa, right? And that was within less than 75 kilometers. So even long-term blue sky, right, this is now becoming a district play where we believe that this is only the start of probably multiple discoveries over a long time. This could be a company building district.
And do you have a long-term vision for the company? Do you want to start producing? Do you want to just put it up for sale? Do you have a vision here?
The biggest vision is that we have a unique experience because we have 2 guys who were part of 2 of the 5 builds that happened, right? And that's a rare experience and knowing how to navigate such large projects. And that's why I talk a lot about windows. And I feel like sometimes I'm guiding one of those gigantic container ships right through the Panama Canal, right? That's the way you think of how do you guide this technically, markets, and also locally. And I talk a lot about the creation of political will over an extended period of time, right? But the without any doubt, my mentality is I'm going to build it, right? Because I think that's the mentality you must have in order to, even if you end up selling it, right? Even if somebody ends up wanting it more than you have to be checking the boxes and thinking like an operator would, right? How would they approach a project, right? But I also believe that Frank's overall strategy is company building, and he would like to take those valuations because there's in the old Lassonde curve that goes up for discovery, comes back down, post resourcing gets back into project development. That's when that curve happens. And there's so many projects stuck at that low point because they don't have either I call it, they don't have the asset, they don't have the team, or they don't have the sponsorship. And since we have all three of those things, it can create an opportunity to repeat this formula and build a larger scale company with the idea of getting projects to the point of a construction decision, whether they end up being bought by somebody else, spitting out because we've attracted partners to build them, whatever. But either way, you're thinking like this project must be built.
Excellent. Well, now that we've had this name change and this shift in strategy, what's the next development that investors can look out for, Ian?
Well, we've announced the mobilization of a second drill, right? And so that will mean that our news flow will start doubling up in the amount of time. And we're going to be taking, the second drill will be able to take some higher geological risks and testing bigger step outs and some geological thesis on additional targets. But I don't think that's the last. I think we'll see more. And we'll also start seeing some of the things that are required in terms of engineering and design work that would support and advancing the project. My goal would be to be doing a PEA in 2026, right? And the reason for that is simple. We're also going through presidential elections in Colombia in the next 12 months. The current, I think that Colombia has had a bad rap. I would argue that it's been an unfair bad rap, but it has, right? Market has put a discount on Colombia because of the current president. But most people don't know that in 12 months are elections and he cannot run again. You can only run for one term in Colombia. And so I want to make sure that whoever next comes in, because I've seen it and it's happened to me and it's happened to others, right? There's a need, right? There's a political need to say, showing an attraction of investment or job creation or whatever the reason is, right? And you want to have a project that has a description, at least it's a conceptual project that you can present and say, we are one of the options.
And if an investor were to ask you, Ian, well, I'm concerned about the risk of nationalization from the government of Colombia. How would you address that question?
My biggest way of addressing that is, that it was an old word that we used to say, right? But and national relations kind of come indirectly now, right? There's a reason to squash a project, right? But my argument would be Colombia has for 40 years has had right or center right presidents. This is the first leftist president in 40 years. I do not think, I think it's going to be an anomaly, right, based on his popularity. I do not think it's long term. Colombia's economy is based upon oil and coal. Over 50% of the exports of the country are oil and coal. Many people don't know it's the fifth largest coal producer, but it obviously needs to diversify away from a hydrocarbon based economy if the whole world is trying to move away from it, right? Whether you believe in it or not, actions are real. And I believe, it's going to need it. And these projects are scale and size that they're not easy to nationalize, right? They can't be done by themselves, right? And we're probably looking way into the future. When you look at previous nationalizations of copper, if you look at the formation of Codelco in Chile, it was based on multiple mines running, multiple smelters running, and taking over an existing overall industry. And we are way far away from that in Colombia.
Good. All right. Excellent. Well, we'll look out for the next press release. Ian, where can we follow the company in the meantime?
So our news website is coppergiant.co, right? So please, that's the best place to go. I think the Libero Copper website will soon start redirecting to there, but that is our new website, and we're putting the polishing on it. We're going through this rebranding really fast, but I invite everybody to go to coppergiant.co, or you can email myself. I'm Harris at coppergiant.co. and look forward to taking this project and seeing that re-rate when you go from that point 1.2 cents per pound in the ground and get to the lower level of the other. I always say there's a big bifurcation, so it's like a big leap to get that graduation. But to go from a point two even to a one, that would be a serious revaluation of the company. And the last, I'm optimistic because things are going pretty well over the last few weeks, and we've got a lot of new news coming out.
Thank you, Ian. We'll put the links down below, so make sure to follow Copper Giant there, and we'll speak again soon, Ian. I'm sure there's more news to discuss in the coming quarters.
Thank you, David. Always a pleasure to have our chats.
Always a pleasure to host you, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.